For you, what's it been like getting to cover women's basketball as it's really taken off here over the past couple of years?
Yeah, well, I think it's funny because right now in this moment, everyone is talking about how women's basketball is here, it's exploded, and this is the most excitement and popularity that there's ever been around the sport. But even starting covering it in 2018, 2019, there was a steady stream of momentum that was building even then. And we felt it each year with increased viewership on different games and attendance. Things were going in the right direction, and then obviously now with players like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, Paige Beckers, Cameron Brink that are really ushering in this moment of real kind of explosive growth. It feels like this is the moment that so many people were waiting for, including people that have been, honestly covering the league and following the league well before I've been around. I mean, my coworker at ESPN who covers women's basketball, like it's so cool to hear him say like we've been waiting for this for really decades, and so it's really just special to see it all kind of come together in this moment this year around the college game. Obviously now the WNBA. It means there's a lot more interest, and it's cool to see what that also means like for our coverage at ESPN. I've never been more busy than this season and traveling and whatnot, but it's all really exciting when it all is going to result in more coverage for the game and more interest in that coverage, and people are really gravitating towards some of these stars and some of these young rookies in particular. So I hope that this is just the beginning of a really important moment, a great moment for the sport, and I think that's the direction we're headed.
Yeah, you said back in 2018, 2019, you started to feel the momentum really building, but then this year it took off. When was the moment for you where you were like, oh, this year feels different?
I think being honestly, even starting in 2023 with the Final Four and seeing what those TV ratings looked like, because that was like the first year, I think it was like 9.9 million or something, where the Iowa LSU game had that kind of record number. And then, so that was like so extraordinary in of itself. And when you're at a Final Four, you're seeing these numbers come in, and everyone's kind of talking about them even while you're there covering it or in the immediate aftermath of that. And so even like this year at the Final Four, we saw the numbers like throughout the whole tournament that were like really climbing. And I think that's like something that it's not just, I think, because of the ESPN thing, but just being able to see a number attached to like you can like quantify interest in this way. That's one of the big ways. I mean, we were even like going into the national championship game saying like, oh, is this going to be like, are we going to hit 20 million? Like it's crazy to see that explosion in the numbers when it comes to viewership. But then I think too, it's also the casual conversations, and I have so many either family members or acquaintances or people I know or come across that maybe like they'll tell me like they didn't follow women's basketball before, but now they started to follow it. They know some of the big names like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Asia Wilson, and to see that change where it feels like it's becoming more of a part of like the cultural sports footprint. And there's so many times even throughout this summer where it felt like the WNBA was the topic of conversation in sports, and that just wasn't the case. Excuse me, that wasn't the case in years past. So there's just little things like that, whether it was dominating the news cycle in some ways, or it was coming up in casual conversations, or then obviously like the TV numbers when you're able to see, oh, like even now with some of these playoff games, like getting really good ratings too, that it's like all kind of coming together in this perfect storm.
Yeah, even some of the conversations on Twitter, on social media, not only are they happening, but they're also positive. When in the past, I felt like a lot of the conversations around women's sports and women's basketball that were happening on social media were often kind of had this like negative tone to them. And I love the fact that the conversations that are happening now are like promoting women's basketball as this is a really fun sport to watch. And it's coming from men and women. It's not just women that are watching women's sports now. So no, it's this year definitely, I agree, has just been remarkable, and it's like been such a long time coming for women's basketball. But something that I think is really interesting about you is you started covering women's basketball truly back in 2014 when you were covering Stanford women's basketball, which is a really great program in the country. And then you covered UConn for a couple years, and now you're at ESPN. You're not only covering college women's basketball but also the WNBA. So, you know, whether it be Dejanay Carrington at Stanford or some of the players that you covered at UConn, what's it been like to truly follow them throughout their career from college now to the pros?
Yeah, there's a few players like that where I kind of was covering them in college, and then not knowing that it was my women's basketball coverage in college ended up being a little bit more like off and on. It wasn't like consistent for 4 years. And I kind of like, I don't know if I have like a regret about that, but part of me wishes I did follow them for more consistent. You know how it was at the Daily. I've tried out news. I was covering other sports. I was an editor, so I was trying different things. But it is really cool to see. You know, Dejanay was a player I overlapped with at Stanford, and I was actually talking with Lexi Hull from the Fever. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, and I think I just missed her. But I was trying to, I was like, oh, I went to Stanford and I graduated in 2018. I think she must have started like that fall. So I think it's really special though, even like post my own college days, being able to follow someone like Paige Beckers is probably the best example I have of this, and some of her UConn classmates, because I started covering UConn back in 2019. So now, like, when there's players that went from UConn and now are in the league, it's really cool to see them take that next step and remember what their college days were like, and how sometimes, there's some ups and downs, right? And, people weren't sure what their pro prospects would be like. And so for Paige in particular, I have this, I've been like around her the most, probably because I wrote a big story on her comeback from her ACL tear. And so she's still in the college game now, but I think that's a person that she's the presumptive number one pick next spring. And so being able to one day see her get drafted, and then to see whatever team she lands on, and the impact she's going to make in the league. And even just to see, being able to see an athlete's, speaking of ups and downs, like she had more ups and downs probably than anyone, coming back from 2 really serious knee injuries, and now coming, like, basically dominating the sport in that year that she's been back, and having this kind of like cultural resonance where she's like a really big deal. She's going to New York Fashion Week and whatnot. So I love seeing how they progress as people, as athletes. Sometimes they come out of their shells more, they become more talkative with the media, or you just get to know the people around them too, and like their families. So it is a really special part of this job. And that's something that I'm like very cognizant of, the fact that I've only been full-time covering women's basketball now since 2019. But, if I'm, 10 years from then, like say 2029, like it's going to be really cool to look back at all the other people I see kind of as they have that progression in their own careers and their own lives, like how I was able to kind of either capture that with my reporting or just kind of be a witness to it. So that's definitely an underrated part of this job, I'd say.
Yeah, nothing really replaces the relationships you build by being there like every single day for every practice, like you are for UConn. You live in Connecticut, so it's easy for you to get there and get to those practices. Nothing replaces that kind of relationship that you build with those players and the sorts of stories you're able to tell because of it. Going back to kind of the Bay Area, obviously our humble beginnings at Stanford, we know the Bay Area is such a great basketball town. So how do you think San Francisco is going to embrace its new WNBA team in 2025?
Oh, I am really excited for this Golden State team. One of the things that stuck out to me from the get-go was just the fact that the ownership is really committed. This is, of course, the Warriors' ownership, and they said right away that they wanted to win a WNBA title in 5 years, which might be a little aggressive and it might not completely come into fruition, but seeing the resources that they're committing, seeing that this team's going to be playing in the Chase Center. They're going to have the Warriors' old practice facility in Oakland, which is obviously, NBA grade facility, state of the art. And also seeing the people that they've hired the former, one of the former kind of big shots at the Angel City NWSL club. And so I think they've really kind of approached this as like, this is going to be a serious basketball and business venture. When we talk about the WNBA, we're also like wanting to see that the ownership groups that are coming in are going to make that investment in the players and really in the franchise. And so I think that's really going to drive this whole thing. And when it comes to the actual Bay Area kind of fan base, I think it's going to be great. I mean, this is a area that had a WNBA team back in the Sacramento Monarchs. Obviously, they haven't been around in a long time, so I'm sure there's some old fans that are excited to have the WNBA return. There's some maybe Stanford and Cal fans that are excited to have pro women's basketball in the Bay Area. And then I think just, like we were talking about what you were saying, like women's sports now, it's not just like this niche thing that whether or not it's men or women or whoever, it doesn't have to be just kids. It can be adults. It's going to be everyone is going to want to show up at these games. And I think the Warriors are really committed to making this like a nice, like kind of like fan experience almost. Like that's something that I've heard the new Valkyries president talk about in particular. So just with that organizational commitment, the excitement of the fan base that's building there, I'm so excited. I've already been like, I am signing up to go cover that inaugural game. Like, definitely going to happen. No questions asked, right? Just plan on me being there. Is that cool?
No, I totally agree. And I think I saw like 17,000 season ticket deposits. It's amazing. So this Golden State team, they're debuting in 2025. And then I believe it's Toronto and Portland that are debuting in 2026. So now the league is up to 15 teams. At what point do you think the league is going to stop expanding?
The clear kind of benchmark that we've seen from the commissioner is 16 teams, ideally by 2027, 2028. And I think they're obviously on track to do that. Now that we're at 15, that means one more to go. So they do have to figure out this kind of nice balance between, expansion, and also the reasons behind that are the more teams that you're bringing into the league, it does kind of drive the league's growth, assuming that these are strong franchises you're building in. I do think you don't want to overexpand, or you don't want to expand too quickly, perhaps. So I do think, once they hit 16, the question is really what is the next kind of step with that? I think, getting through this first round and seeing how things would go, and that it's, at the right level would be maybe important. And then I don't know if like long term, maybe another 5 to 10 years down the line, if they look at 20, I do feel like that could be a good number to maybe reach. I think the more markets you have in the WNBA, it would be for the better. You also want to make sure, this is going to be talking about a lot more roster spots, and there's also the possibility of roster expansion. So how many more roster spots are they including? That's a factor that the league will have to kind of consider, and if that makes sense for, the talent pool and for where things are at the sport. But I do think this goal of 16, at least through the next few years, is a good one to kind of see and suss out. But, like I was saying before, the WNBA is looking for committed owners. So they're not just going to let someone in that, is willy-nilly or doesn't want to make that actual financial investment and having a pro sports team. And that's a really interesting dynamic we're seeing now, because some of these older ownership groups that are still in the league maybe haven't made the same sorts of financial investment that we're seeing, for example, the Warriors and Golden State make by, having these like really nice practice facilities or, really nice arenas that they play in. So that's also this kind of tension that's going to have to be figured out when you think about kind of like the old guard of ownerships, the new guard of ownerships. And then it's not perfectly, that's a generalization. It's not like every older ownership group is in that category, and every, I don't want to make it seem that simple, but that is kind of something that we'll have to monitor as well as the league kind of gets into this new area of growth.